And welcome to the Historical Society of Carroll County Talks of the Tavern Zoom. This is July 23rd, 2020. And welcome, I'm Krista McMasters, Board Chair of the Historical Society of Carroll County. Tonight we have a special treat. We have Master Gardener Linda Broadfoot presenting on the newly renovated herb garden behind the Sherman-Fisher-Shellman House on the campus of the Historical Society. She was assisted in this presentation by Courtneyddington of the University of Maryland. Courtney is the Carroll County's home horticultural agent and the Master Gardeners Program Coordinator. Before I continue, again, I want to thank our partners in making this presentation possible. The Community Media Center, always professional, and it's a pleasure to work with. And I'd also like to thank the Carroll Nonprofit Center and their Executive Director, Mark Kreider, for allowing us to use their offices for a superior online connection. We have muted everyone's audio for the speaker's presentation, but you just have to make sure that there are no disruptions. Please turn off your microphone and video. Both toggles are found in the lower left corner of your Zoom screen. Some of you may be tired of listening to these instructions, but there is always new listeners. So we're going to recommend using the active speaker view, and that's at the top right corner of your Zoom screen. So if you see the word speaker, you're fine. If you see the word gallery, click on it and it'll switch you to speaker view. This way the speaker will be the largest window on your screen. This presentation is being recorded for future use, so we ask that questions be held to the end of the talk. To ask a question via Zoom, you can easily raise your hand or use the chat box. All right, now here's the instructions for both. To raise your hand, you can move your mouse to the bottom of the Zoom window, and a menu will appear or at the top of your screen if you're using an iPad. And tap the participant button, and that will bring up a list of participants. At the bottom of the participant list, you will see a raised hand box. Click on that, and then you'll see a dialog box asking you to allow us to unmute you. Click yes, and your mic will be unmuted so you can ask a question when you're recognized. All right. There's an alternate, or you can use the chat box. And the chat box feature is on the bottom of your Zoom screen. To type in your question, which I will read aloud, in the chat, you can send the message to everyone or just use the pull-down menu and send a message to a single participant. I will review these instructions at the end of today's production if I went a little fast for you. As a board chair of the HSCC and a gardener, today's talk is near and dear to my heart. A few years ago, when the Historical Society was looking for assistance in renovating our overgrown gardens, Linda volunteered and provided the leadership to develop an herb garden that would be consistent with the early 19th century Sherman and successful Pennsylvania German tavern keeper built the house around circa 1807. Linda Broadfoot and Courtneyddington's talk will be about the herb garden, its development, and share information on Pennsylvania German herb garden practices. Before I formally introduce today's speaker, I would like to thank Bill Balm. Bill Balm is an HSCC board member, chair of the library committee, and is so very helpful with coordinating volunteers and the master gardeners to work in our gardens behind the Historical Society buildings. Thank you to Bill for helping us get master gardener speakers to several of our talks at the Tavern this year. Linda Broadfoot is a University of Maryland Extension Master Gardener and volunteer. As a Master Gardener, volunteers provide science-based information and public education by answering questions and developing classes and lectures, and partnering with community groups to develop educational demonstration gardens like the ones behind the Historical Society. Linda will be giving you this presentation next.
There I am. Sorry, I'm not very tech savvy. Okay, so when I was approached to redo the herb garden, I asked several other master gardeners to help me. We actually did a lot of research to figure out what would be the appropriate herbs and what the garden should look like. And so without further ado, if I can get this thing started, I just clicked.
The base? Okay.
I told you I wasn't tech savvy.
Share screen.
Yeah, that's what we're working on here.
All right, Courtney can here.
We had this a little while ago and now we
Yeah.
don't have it again.
I need to get to view. I can't see.
Bear with us, folks.
Here we go. Can you see slideshow? I can't see.
Okay. Try back at the bottom and see if you can get a different screen. Let me give this a shot.
So go up to the upper left there in the
Upper
orange
left.
part
Uh-huh.
Yeah. and tap on that. I think that'll do it for you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Now go one right to the right, one more.
If you go to the bottom, keep going over. One more. It's a little play button in a stand. Yeah, that one.
Ah, there we go. So anyway, of course, you know, it's the University of Maryland Master Gardeners. When we started out our research looking at who actually lived there. And of course, they were of German descent, as am I. And we found that they like to have things very symmetrical. If you planted something over here, you had to plant it over there as well. If you see one of these little pictures down here, that's was called a German foursquare. And what they would do is they would plant a central plant, which meant something to the family itself. And then they would plant everything in raised beds around it, which made it actually, you could build your own soil that way and made it much easier. When I started talking about what they used all the herbs for, I was telling somebody that I felt like a snake oil salesman because it was supposed to do this and supposed to do this and wait, there's more. So they planted the herbs mostly for medicinal purposes. Yes, they used them in cooking and other ways in their house, but remember, there was no CVS on the corner. There were no pharmaceutical companies. And so therefore, you grew your own herbs for your own remedies. They brought many of the herbs with them from their home countries because they really didn't know what was available here. Once they were here and found the other herbs, they learned how to use them, of course. Now, if you're doing medicinal remedies, there's different things you can do. And I will tell you that I will not give you specifics on how to use these things because when you're growing herbs, you don't know what the concentration of the remedy part is. In other words, when they, the pharmaceutical companies know exactly what dose you're getting. And if you're growing herbs, it's going to depend on your soil, the amount of rain you get, the species of plant you're using. And so, but these were the different ways that they actually fixed it. They would make teas and poultices and tinctures, essential oils, extracts, and even balms and salves. Now, when you do culinary flavorings, you would dry your herbs, or you could use them fresh from the garden. I will tell you that if you are drying herbs, you only need about a third of what you would normally measure out if it was fresh, mostly because all the moisture has been taken out of it and it's concentrated in the dried form. Also, they used it around their house for getting rid of odors, repelling bugs. There were so many different uses. There was very little that they did not use of a plant. And this is, when we were first coming up, we came up with this design because it was nice and symmetrical, and we had a central plant. We planted rosemary in the middle, although they've planted yucca and all kinds of other things in there. So we picked the rosemary for that. Now, mullein, this is one of those plants that they use for so many different things. They would use the leaves to line their shoes. They could make a tea for coughs and colds. I don't recommend it. And the very top thing, now you see this plant all the time on the side of the road and you think weed, but they actually use this. They would take that top part and dip it in tallow and then light it and use it as a torch. So there's very little of anything that they would not use on a plant. This one is yarrow. Now, this is where you get to find out whether you're a snake oil salesman or not. They use it for nosebleeds, toothaches, colds, digestive problems, chapped skin. They would just run down the list. You'll see a lot of different things. Sometimes I think they went, oh, let's try this. For those of you who do not grow yarrow, it has a very medicinal smell to it. Southern wood. This one also has, they used it for repelling moths. They used it even as a hedge, but I think it's a little unruly for that. Anyway, I even read a report one time that they used it as like a day after pill. I have no idea how they did that. So again, I don't recommend using anything that I tell you here. Rosemary. Now, we all like the smell of rosemary. It's very good with lamb, by the way. They used it as an antiseptic for aching joints, circulation, a rinse for your hair. And they used it in facial steams. The next one is thyme, which you, I'm sure, are all familiar with. I happen to like using mine in vegetable soup. My soup is not complete unless I put some in. They've also made teas out of it. They used it for coughs and sore throats as a digestive aid. Bee balm, which is great because it really does attract bees, and which are really good pollinators for your garden. They use this one for sore throats, nausea, flatulence, menstrual pain, and insomnia. Now, if you don't think that isn't the list, I don't know what is. You can also use those flowers if you cut them off and put them in salad. People did think you did something really special, but you've just put in some bee balm flower. Sage, which I'm sure you all use at Thanksgiving. They use that for a digestive aid, for an antiseptic, for diarrhea, eye wash, facial steam. Do I sound like a snake oil salesman yet? Chamomile, which I know that all of you are familiar with chamomile tea. It is very soothing. Now, if you see the one picture is actually from the garden, that variety is, we're looking at replacing that with a different one because it's not doing quite as well there as we would have liked. The other one is a picture of chamomile from someone else's garden. But anyway, they use that also for treating wounds, for eczema, as a facial steam. They also used it in dyes because, you know, they would have dyed their own cloth that they had woven. Chives, I know you're all know this one. They used it as a digestive aid for a mild laxative. They also used it like a mild antibiotic. And it does contain some iron and vitamins. I'm sure that you all use it in cooking, as do I. Calendula. Now these look good in salads. You can cut off the flowers and throw those in. They also used them for leg ulcers, varicose veins, bed sores, bruises, antiseptics, a mouthwash. And it was also used in bath conditioners. Lavender, one of my favorite herbs. There is a difference between culinary lavender and the other lavender. I do not do the culinary lavender, but I have had lavender lemonade and lavender cookies and lavender ice cream even. But as a medicine, they would use it to treat headaches, nerves, flatulence again. Apparently they had a lot of that. Fainting, dizziness, and halitosis. Blackeyed Susans. Now these are native to this continent, and they found them when they came over. They used it as colds, for earaches, sores, snake bites, and for worms in your children. And of course, you all know that it's the state flower of Maryland. Coneflower, or echinacea, which gets a lot of press these days. They used it for antiseptic, digestive aids, thyroid, flatulence again, eczema, acne, boils, and it's a blood purification. Now, this is a picture of when we were starting out with this garden. In case you're intimidated by starting an herb garden and you don't know if you can afford to do something like this, we actually just put out a call and asked if anybody had any bricks and old bricks that they wanted to get rid of. And we got enough to do the garden with from several different sources. Also, the plants themselves, we put out a call for bee balm and we got bee balm. The yarrow came from my yard. The mullein came from another master gardener's yard. So people will share. If you ask and say you're looking for something, a lot of times somebody will have something and you can actually get a cutting or a whole plant itself. Here's a diagram of the gardens in the house. I don't have anything to point with to you. The herb garden there was very small. And then they told us they wanted it to be a lot larger than that and gave us the measurements. And so we came up with the garden design that we did. We did try to get herbs that were popular at the time. Now, it's not that some of the other herbs didn't exist that you and I know of today, but those were not the ones that they used all the time. And so therefore, we picked the ones that would have been used at that time. And here is when we were started out. The problem at first was the garden was right next to the sidewalk and people would walk through the garden. And so an Eagle Scout decided to make this his project, and he built this fence here along so people couldn't just cut across the garden, and it has saved a lot of the plants. Another view of the garden here. And these plants, the ones that we have put in, come back every year. So we made it to be self-sustaining. Also, in case you're wondering about the weeding, we have very little of it that we do, because when we first put the garden in, we actually laid down newspaper before we put some mulch over the top. So we get very little weeds except where the squirrels plant their nuts. Here we are again at the back of the house, and you can see other views of the garden. Please come by and see it sometime. There is literature available there that tells you what each plant is in case you don't know what they are. And if one of us is in there working in the garden, we're very happy to answer any of your questions. And that is the end of that. Lynn, can I throw it back to you?
Well, actually,
Oh, Chris, sorry.
I have a couple questions for you, Linda. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, one is, I know when I worked on some of 18th century house landscape work, there's always a question about whether they were going to use something period or something based on historic documents. Can you tell me which way this garden was?
It was a little bit of everything. Everybody brought something to the table. We did use some books that told us, you know, what was grown at that time. There were a lot of different references that we used in order to plan this, and it took us months to actually plan this whole thing.
I would bet. I would bet the work really shows. So I know that with fruit trees and some flowers, there's hybrids you can get, or there's antique varietals, but I have never heard that about herbs. Is there such a thing as antique varietals that are herbs?
Okay. In other words, like an heirloom, okay?
Yes. Yeah.
And an heirloom would be something that is grown from the same plant, from seed from that plant or cuttings. That's the same thing year after year. When you go in for hybrids, they've crossed at least 2 different plants. And if you take something from that and plant it the next year, you might get the same thing, or you might get one of the plants that was used to cross for it. So I always like heirloom varieties. That's my personal preference.
So I understand Courtney can also respond, Courtneyddington from the University of Maryland. How about you, Courtney? Have you ever heard of a antique varietal herb?
There are some lines. It's not as usual that you would consider that. I think mainly what we've seen, or what I've seen, is there's more like dwarf varieties of some of them. So like more container varieties that you would be able to have, where a lot of the herbs that were saved during like historical time periods are a little bit more kind of like large scale, unruly perhaps, because oftentimes like Linda and I were talking about, it takes a lot of material to dry down into the ingredients that you need to make some of these things. So they were planting, they had stuff by their house, but they also planted a lot more quantities than what we're able to show in the space that we have for the demonstration garden. So that was conducive to having a very large plant. A larger plant would be great. Like our yarrow, if you see the yarrow is like reaching out to grab you and pull you into the garden. But nowadays, if you were to buy yarrow seeds, more than likely they're going to be half the height that you would actually see compared to the one that Linda has been propagating. So not necessarily heirloom versus hybrid, but I guess hybrid would be more manageable sizes. And if anyone has ever, I'm not going to say made the mistake of planting mints, but there are many different hybrid varieties of mints that have different flavors, like your, chocolate mint and lemon balm type mints and things like that.
I know that when I worked at Montclair, we were trying to find antique heirloom marigolds. And if you look at marigolds today, they're kind of short and very hardy. Those flowers stand up straight till they're gone. Whereas the marigolds from the 18th century were very leggy and very fall over, and you could barely tell they really were a marigold. And to see the difference over the centuries is amazing, even though they're called the same thing.
Yeah, I think when you get into some of the more floral herbs, that's when you're probably going to see more heirlooms or named varieties. When I do judging for the fair, when it's the official fair or whatever we do for 4-H, just under marigolds, you have different kinds of blooms where they're double or single. It's incredible the variety that they have now of these really simple plants, even, multiple colors. Like we were talking about yarrow. Normally it's just kind of like a white or a yellow color in nature, but now you can have magenta, you can have orange. They have all kinds of colors that are wild. I mean, I have some key lime marigolds. Those are not, true to time period, but they're really cool. That makes me happy. Still has some of the same effect. But so it's not as obvious, and the supply is a lot more limited. So honestly, you probably just are going to get what you get when you go to the store.
All right, well, on a slightly different tact, I was going to ask, in all your research with Dutch early gardening, did you ever come across any biblical gardening that the Germans used? Because I never really have.
No, I didn't find that in our research.
Okay, just wondering if I missed something, because to me that would be interesting.
Yes.
For me, when we had visited the Renfrew Institute, it's in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. Wonderful little museum to go to. They had a really nice kitchen garden and some really nice seed saving types of things that they do there. They were kind of explaining how usually that central plant in the design of a Pennsylvania Dutch kitchen garden could symbolize God or their religion of the family. So there are some aspects, some go along the lines of like celestial, like where it's the stars and the moon or something like that. So there was kind of a underlying reference to some of that, but I think it just more depended on the family and what their beliefs were.
Great. Well, I hope my questions have sparked some interest for questions from other people who've been listening in. And so we can take your Zoom questions, and I just want to remind our audience how you can ask us questions. You can raise your hand by moving your mouse to the button of the Zoom window, and a menu will appear at the top of your screen if you're using an iPad. Tap on the participant button. That'll bring up the list of participants, and at the bottom of the participant list, you will see a raised hand box. So click that, and then you'll see the dialog box. You can ask your question. It'll allow us to unmute. Lynn is watching for those hands. And then your mic will be unmuted so you can just ask your question. Or, it's another way to do it, or you can use the chat box feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Type in your question, which I'll read out loud. And in the chat, you can send a message to everyone or just the pull down menu and send it to a single participant. So do we have any questions that we'd like to field from our folks who are watching?
Chris, I have a question of Courtney. I wonder if Courtney could talk a little bit about how the Extension Service reaches out to master gardeners and what role they play.
Sure. I do see one question in the chat box. We can let some people type in their questions there and we'll visit those. But while we're giving people a chance, yeah, so kind of give you an overview. I know some of you on this call are familiar with the Extension program and with the Master Gardener program as well, but some of you might not be because for whatever reason, Extension is the best kept secret at the University of Maryland. Since the University of Maryland is a land grant university and y'all pay taxes to support it in a sense through the counties, and ultimately state and federal funds go to it as well, they are charged with providing education to the state of Maryland through the Extension program. So basically, University of Maryland has all the classes, all the knowledge, all the research stations that they gain all of this great information from, and they are entrusted to matriculate that all to the people. So share that with the public, but share it in a way that is understandable and accessible to everyone in the communities surrounding the university. So every county has an extension office. Extension offices have educators and faculty members that tackle numerous different topics. So we have like food and nutrition, family, home, and consumer science type things. 4-H, which is youth development. There's agriculture. So we have, in Carroll County, we have 2 agriculture agents. And all of these individuals work to serve you as the residents of Carroll County, but we can take other residents from around, but our job as Carroll County agents is to service you guys. My job is, I'm the home horticulture agent. So I not only service residents' questions dealing with their landscapes, their yards, any problems, any questions like plant IDs or what's killing my plant or what's this bug. If I get a question about a bug in a home or maybe a rogue animal that kind of like is tearing up your yard or something, or you just wonder what it is. Or honestly, if it's a question that our secretaries don't know where to put you, you're probably going to come to me. So I'm kind of the catch-all for like all the curious questions, the ones that are difficult or the ones that are just weird and fun. So I do have a really cool job. You just I get a lot of questions, so it's like you have to be patient with me. I will say right now, our office isn't officially open due to the COVID restrictions. So we are teleworking for the most part right now. We're hoping to open sometime later in August when we finally get all of our supplies in to set up. But even then, it'll be on a more limited basis. But for the time being, you can definitely send emails to me. And I also do a live broadcast where I take questions similar to this broadcast over Facebook on our Facebook page. I partner up with our small farms and alternative agriculture agent, Peter Coffey, and we have a really good time kind of having a talk soup about what's going on in the garden every Tuesday at 10. So you
Oh,
can jump in
fabulous.
on that if you find more questions tonight that you have that didn't get answered, or if you're thinking about something at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, oh, I gotta ask this. You can also email us. So my email, the easiest one is ccmg@umd.edu, which that's like Carroll County Master Gardeners at universityofmaryland.edu. So ccmg@umd.edu. So we can respond to that. There's a directory online too under the Carroll County Extension page. But so that's half of my job. The other half is the Master Gardener program itself. Almost every county and then Baltimore City has a Master Gardener program. So the horticulture agents or a faculty member at the county office heads up the Master Gardener program, and we oversee activities, events. I also do training for Master Gardeners. I train you to be a volunteer. I recruit you and lure you in and then make it work like Linda. So I have a good time doing educational programs with volunteers. And so basically that reaches out to individuals who kind of are curious about gardening. You might not have any experience whatsoever, but you also might have a lot of experience and you just are really ready to start sharing that experience with others. This program is meant to help encourage people and empower them to share their passion for gardening, but also like environmental care and understanding, because there's a lot of things that we can do as individuals to help affect our environment, and also because we are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, the things that we do in our backyard actually has like a greater effect for the overall health of not only just Marylanders, but I mean, honestly, global seafood, because the Chesapeake Bay is where a lot of our seafood nationally and globally starts, because it's that nursery that, you know, is very important for most fish on the eastern coast. So it's incredibly important that we know what we do in our yards and how that affects things downstream in our watershed. But definitely, like, that's kind of a summary. Like, you know, I answer questions and I train people how to garden, and I'm here to, you know, serve you. If you guys have ideas for programs that you really want to learn about, you request it and we develop something, and then we get to, I guess, do a Zoom meeting on it now, but maybe in the future we'll be able to do something in person. So I'm hoping for that.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you. Now we do have a couple of chat questions here, and I'll let Linda and Courtney fight over them. The first one says, I have a lot of shade on my property. This is from, I think it's Sherry Taylor. Okay. And it says, I have a lot of shade on my property. Are there herbs that work better in partial shade or full sun? That's the first part of the question. Also, are there herbs that are more pest, rabbit, deer tolerant than others? What do you think?
Okay. There are herbs that do well in shade. Most of the herbs seem to like full sun, but there are ones that are shade tolerant. As far as pests, I don't really have a lot of problems in my herb garden with pests, except for squirrels who like to dig up everything.
All right, well, I have another question, and this is going to be an easy one. This is from Jessica. It says, I am curious to know if there are any dye gardens at the Historical Society or elsewhere in the county.
Yes, there actually is there is a dye garden. Back, if you saw the diagram where it showed the loom house, right next to that, they have a dye garden with the plants that they would use to make the dyes from.
I knew that was easy because that's a new addition to the back of the Shellman House. So that's great. Lynn, do you see any hands up?
I don't see hands up, but I'm wondering if you could elaborate, either Linda or Courtney, on exactly what are the herbs that would grow well in shade?
There are things that I'm trying to think of one specifically because I don't have my herb garden in shade. But a bleeding heart is an herb and it does grow in shade. There are a lot of plants that actually are herbs that people don't think of as that. They go, oh, that's a nice flower, but sometimes they're really herbs.
Yeah,
Chocolate's an herb.
I had no idea you could eat bee balm. I have a lot of it. I had no idea. I'll have to go out and try some.
Throw it in a salad. People will think you did something special.
I
All
think
right.
some of the more traditional herbs that you see that people are thinking of, like the parsleys, the basils, some of those, right now in my garden, I actually interplant those in between some of the rows of my taller plants. And they do fairly well because in some cases, they don't particularly like a lot of heat. So they might like more sun, but you can get away with kind of a sunny spot where they might be underneath the plant because they're a little bit more cool. Like right now, since we've had 100-degree weather, my cilantro is all bolting, which is fabulous. But I mean, there's like the coneflowers, those will be able to grow. They'll grow in the partial sun or shade. Like it can't be like a full shade. I know there are people that eat fiddleheads. So like there are ferns that you can plant that are gorgeous, and they do have edible parts to them as well. I mean, I would consider that like an herb. So it won't be labeled on the seed packet per se because they're going to try to put you in the right direction to plant those plants in the best location to make them the biggest and the most successful. But like some of those like the parsleys and things like that, you could get away with putting them in a partial shade. I would consider putting them in maybe a container that you could sort of try to move to the best position. Once those plants grow to a larger size, they'll be able to tolerate the shade a little bit better once they have leaf coverage. And then you would get into like things like more vegetable consideration, like lettuces and stuff like that are obviously a really good, more shade tolerant type plant. I mean, not quite an herb per se, but deer resistant. I think like Linda was saying, herbs are really great for having usually like some kind of a astringent taste to them. So honestly, those alkaloids in those plants themselves are a way that plants naturally defend themselves. So marigolds, for instance, the chemical in the marigold that makes them smell so potent is what we derive pyrethroid insecticides from, because that's an alkaloid in the actual plant that makes it taste bad to things that are going to eat it, like bugs or rabbits or something like that. So they're a really good border plant to put around all your really expensive plants because it's going to keep things out of there. I have a problem with a little bit of bug damage on my sage, but I absolutely love sage in my garden. I love it in my landscape garden, actually. I have replaced almost all of my lamb's ears with sage because I've let it grow to like a shrub size. And honestly, that plant itself can even handle and tolerate damage from like a rabbit, or in my case, I have potbelly pigs that will just eat anything. And so if it can survive being munched on by a mini pig, then I feel like it's a pretty safe bet that it can handle a little bunny rabbit. And oftentimes those type of plants, they get munched on a little bit and then the pest moves on because they are so potent with their fragrance and their astringent taste. Cilantro was another one. To me, cilantro almost smells like stink bugs when they're squished. So I think Chris Pensiger, who's on here too, I think she had said something about that before. So I don't know. It's or maybe it was Linda. Maybe you had said that. But I think herbs in general are a lot more tolerant to pests just because they have a lot more like phytochemicals that we like, that we totally ignore as mammals. And then I guess you could always plant in your shade mint. I will say I do love mint in a fresh salad. I do love mint in like a refreshing drink. Mojitos are awesome. So, you know, garnish like mint jelly, delicious. So if you like that, that's something you could plant. I would plant it in like a big container with a thick wall, but at least then you'd have something like that. Bee balm is very similar. So maybe that would work there.
Yeah, my most successful herb in the shade is mint. I mean, you know, just basically you end up having to mow it down. It just seems to live anywhere except for maybe rocks, but mint will grow in the shade no matter what.
I mean, depending on where you're at and what the landscape is, I mean, there's like wintergreens that you could put down also, which are really awesome little ground covers. And the berries smell just like wintergreen gum. Like that's exactly where that fragrance and flavoring comes from. So it's kind of neat.
Great. All right, I got another little chat comment coming in from Frank. And he says, our new sage plants have died over the last 3 years. Sage used to grow well in the same spot. Any idea what might be happening?
I
think so. It could be, yeah, it could be many things. If it's something that you had success with in 1 year and then you saw it start diminishing, I would start looking at your soil. Obviously, like that place, I don't know of too many like parasites or like worms or anything that affect sage roots off the top of my head, but I would think that it's an environmental issue, so an abiotic cause. So like maybe it's maybe your gutter is leaking there and it's getting too much water, or maybe that particular soil has started to turn a different pH, which oftentimes plants have a very like some of our vegetables and herbs have a narrow pH range. So I would start with maybe pulling up and looking at your roots. If you look at your roots and you see there's a lot of like rot, they're not healthy and like white, or depending on what plant it is, it could be brown or red or whatever. But if you're seeing a lot of rot or diminished roots, that might be a fungus, that might be a parasite like a nematode or something eating the roots. If the roots look normal, maybe just stunted, then I would think look at your soil. So take a soil test. The soil labs are still open. They've always been open. They are considered essential. And for 10 to 20 bucks, depending on what test you get, a soil test can be really valuable. Just remember, you're going to do a soil test for different areas of your yard that you would treat the same. So you treat your lawn all the same across your whole lawn. So that would be one soil test, but you don't treat your lawn the same as you would your ornamental beds or your vegetable garden. So you would do a separate test for your ornamental beds versus your vegetable garden. If your sage plants are in one spot that you've been trying to grow for a long time, I would just do a certain section, like maybe a couple samples from just right around your problem area, and see where that takes you. Because I mean, I've snipped off sage before and stuck it in a cup and not watered it and abused it, and it will still grow. So I'm wondering if maybe there's some other condition that's actively causing it to not do really well. So that's where I would start. Look at your roots and look at your soil, and my laundry's done.
Well, maybe Linda can feel this one if you're stuck with your laundry, but we have one more chat question. And this is from Jessica. She says, I have a variety of herb pots. Sometimes they come back on their own in the spring. Should I bring these pots inside in the winter and try to encourage them to come back?
You could do that. I would check them for bugs first before I brought them in. I've actually done that before and infected other plants in my house. So
That's a scary thought.
A good shower, especially under the leaves, you want to get to make sure, because that's where bugs love to hide. But yes, bring them in. They'll probably get a little leggy looking on you because you don't have that full sun. But yeah, I've done it before.
Yeah, if
Any
you
other
have like
thoughts?
a barn or a shed, some of them are going to naturally sort of die back. And so you're going to want to prune them in the fall anyway. So if you prune them down and then bring those pots in, they're going to be more dormant. So they're not going to, I wouldn't try to encourage them to grow like you would like a house plant. I would put them somewhere like your basement or something that is above freezing. And so that's going to help them still do their dormancy period, which in some cases for some plants, that's really important for them to regenerate the next spring. But you're going to keep the roots from freezing, which in containers, that's often one of the causes that keeps plants from living throughout the winter, because that container is a lot more exposed to temperature changes.
Do you have to water them then if you put them in a shed or a basement frequently, or just like once a month?
I just try to make sure that the soil stays moist, at least underneath the surface. So it doesn't have to be moist on top of the surface, but if you stick your finger down, like next to the plant, maybe like an inch or two down, as long as it's moist there, then I think you're good. You're definitely going to water it less than you would a house plant. Well, depending on how well you take care of your houseplants, but you're going to water it less. Just kind of, it's sort of on life support, if you will. So you want it somewhere that's not going to freeze. Putting it in a shed or a like barn or a basement is a good call, because like Linda said, I can't tell you how many times I brought in a pot that has ants living underneath it, and then I have ants all over my house, and then I'm like, where did these ants come from? And you trace them back to the little hole in your pot there, and you're like, oh, I brought the whole family with my plant. So.
All right, Lynn Wheeler, do we have any hands up?
I don't see any hands up, so I think we're finished.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank Linda and Courtney very much for joining us tonight. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. And I have to say, I was just so glad to be able to host this tonight. So I'm really, really enjoyed it tonight. As most of you know, we typically charge an entrance fee for our BLTs and our Talk of the Taverns. And usually it's a small fee, $3 if you're a member, $7 for non-members. If you enjoyed this presentation, please go on to our homepage. And at the top right-hand side of the homepage, click donate. And just, you know, any amount, any small gift would really help us in this real trying time. I have several upcoming events that I would like to announce tonight. And so first, I'd like to again thank our partners at the Community Media Center and the Carroll Nonprofit Center and Cone Creative for helping us do this presentation and promote these virtual events. These events mean nothing if people aren't in watching them and following through with the recording later. So we really appreciate all their assistance. So on Tuesday, August 18th at 12 o'clock, Sam Riley, who is the president of the Union Mills Homestead, will give a box lunch talk entitled The Road Most Traveled, the Shrivers and the Turnpike. Sam will share the interesting history of the Baltimore-Reisterstown Turnpike and its important role in the developing settlements along the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. So to register, you're going to want to go to our webpage, which is hsccmd.org, Historical Society of County, Maryland.org, hsccmd.org. All right, our next talk at the Tavern will be also Thursday evening, August 27th at 7 p.m. And another Master Gardener is going to be gracing us with his presence. He's David Flora, who will give a virtual tour of the Kimmy House Gardens, and we'll talk about all the native plants that are in that garden, which is entirely different than the Shellman garden you just heard about tonight. So there's an increasing awareness of the advantages of using native plants, and Dave will be there to provide us information, help get you started on your own native plants garden. Again, to register, you'll want to go to our website, hsccmd.org. On Friday, September 11th is another very cool event we'll be holding at 6 p.m. It's an annual fundraiser, which is a bluegrass concert. It's featuring a nationally known bluegrass band called Sideline. They're always in the top tier of bluegrass bands throughout the nation. And their music wowed us last year. We had a sold out crowd last year. So we are again going to Rob's Bluegrass Barn. Jennifer Munch and her committee are hard at work on this event. More information will be available on the HSCC website. This will be a free offering, so consider bringing your picnic basket and chair to sit under the sun and listen to bluegrass music. So we're not going to be charging a door cost, but we're hoping people will help us at least defray the cost of the band. So lastly, please join us for our first virtual gala. That's going to be on Saturday, September 12th from 7 to 8. Our theme this year is Breaking Barriers, and it's a nod to the passage of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. During this hour-long program, we will have a local trivia, entertainment, clips of our Carroll County Breaking Barriers exhibit, and we'll have a silent and live auction. It will be another fun free night. Please come and join us. It'll be on the cable channel HD 1086 or through streaming links available on our HSCCMD website. Again, this will be something available to everybody. So if you've never been to a gala before, this is going to be completely different, and we hope you will come and join us. I want to thank you all again for coming out tonight. Very much appreciated, and see you at one of our next events.